From Washington, D.C., this is Middle East Focus.
Hello, and welcome to Middle East Focus, a weekly podcast on regional affairs and U.S. policy produced by the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. I'm Alistair Taylor, MEI's editorial director. On today's program, we'll be discussing the recently concluded 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference, known as COP26, held in Glasgow, Scotland. We'll be delving into what the conference covered, what it was like to be at the event, and what came out of it. Mohammed Mahmoud will be talking to Abbey Krulik. Mohammed is a senior fellow at MEI and the director of the Climate and Water Program. Abbey's a research assistant with the Climate Water Program and attended the COP26 meeting in Scotland as part of a student delegation.
On October 31st, world leaders, negotiators, scientists, activists, and observers from all around the world gathered in Glasgow, Scotland, to attend the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference, also known as the Conference of Parties, or COP. This body meets annually to make decisions regarding the implementation of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which aims to prevent anthropogenic interference with the climate system. A day after the COP26 meeting formally ended, a climate compromise was reached and adopted by the nations and parties to the meeting. Dubbed the Glasgow Climate Pact, this deal was the outcome of intense climate talks that persisted throughout the duration of the meeting. The Glasgow Climate Pact was a result of the great divide between the various emission reduction plans that most countries submitted ahead of the meeting and the actual emission reductions that are necessary to prevent further climate catastrophe of higher increases in global temperature, especially temperature increases exceeding 2 degrees Celsius. However, since nations were not able to come to agreement on updated emission targets in reflection and recognition of this, they were also tasked under this pact to come prepared for the next COP meeting with new tangible plans for emission reductions that push them closer to what is necessary to limit dangerous increases in global warming. With me is Abbey Krulik, who attended this meeting, referred to as COP26. Abbey, can you tell us a little bit more on your role and the capacity at which you attended this meeting?
Yeah, of course. So I was attending as an official observer with credentials from the COP. So I was there for the first week of the 2-week conference as part of the student delegation from Indiana University, Bloomington, where I'm currently finishing up my last year of undergrad.
And Abbey, for those of us and listeners really that did not actually physically attend the meeting, just for their understanding, can you help explain to us how the COP meeting is actually organized?
So, as far as the space in which the COP takes place, there are typically two main parts to the COP, the blue zone and the green zone. The green zone is a civil society space. This is a space that you don't need official credentials in order to enter. Anybody can enter. It is a ticketed event, but anybody can get tickets. And in this space, there's typically events hosted by NGOs, various groups from around the world who are exploring different issues relating to the climate crisis. And then the other half of the venue of the COP is the blue zone. And this is the area in which all of the meeting rooms and broadcast studios are. There are also a lot of auditorium type spaces for side events on various climate issues. It's also where you will see all of the delegate offices and the negotiating rooms and the plenaries. The plenaries are those big rooms that you'll see on the news. If you think of the United Nations, the plenaries are the big rooms that have all the chairs and tables with the little placards designating different countries that negotiators are representing. So all of that is in the blue zone. And then another large part of the blue zone is the pavilion space. So in the pavilion space, there are basically booths from a lot of different nations or interest groups or NGOs from around the world in which they will hold smaller side events on issues that concern their constituencies. So this year, there are about 100 pavilions in this space, representing everything from sustainable development goals to different nations to, methane and everything in between. Also in this space, MENA was represented this year by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, and Egypt.
Can you sort of add a little bit more on this idea of the pavilion space and the MENA countries you mentioned in their particular, for lack of a better term, exhibits? What kind of things were they showing or presenting at their particular areas or booths?
Yeah, so I mean, each booth presented on a range of different topics relating to, their national strategies, different issues that, people in their nations might be concerned about, or things they want the broader negotiators of the COP to be able to learn about their regions. For example, I attended events at the Morocco Pavilion on youth activism. And I attended an event at the Egypt Pavilion in which the Minister of Environment presented on their new national strategy for addressing climate change. All kinds of different events at each of these pavilions. The Saudi Arabia Pavilion hosted an event on their new carbon circular economy plan. So just things like this, a range of different issues, spanning 2 weeks of time. So lots of different events on lots of different topics, just whatever concerned their constituencies and that they wanted to, share with the broader UNFCCC.
So you mentioned your attending role as observer. Based on that designation of observer versus other potential classes of attendees, how would you rate or how did you find different portions or parts of the meeting accessible? How were different parts of the meeting accessible for you as an observer?
Yeah, so first on the different roles, the main roles are observer and members of the party or various parties that are there in attendance. So, in my role as observer, one of my biggest criticisms of attending the conference is that there are a lot of access issues for observers, a real lack of transparency between what was happening, behind closed doors in which you needed a party designation and, what the observers were able to, see and meaningfully participate in. So, part of this was the first 2 days of the conference were the Leaders Summit. So world leaders from all over the globe were there to, present their national strategies. And this really limited access, cut off practically half the venue to observers. So we couldn't attend any negotiations that were happening those first 2 days. And beyond that, there was really just a broad inability to access negotiation rooms and official, party activities. So there are 9 official constituency groups at the COP, and each of these groups only had 2 passes to observe negotiations. So, at any time where negotiating sessions were taking place behind closed doors, there were only about 18 observers allowed. And, based on conversations that I had with more experienced COP attendees, this is really unprecedented, this, lack of ability for observers to meaningfully engage. I recognize that I say all this as somebody who was inside the blue zone, and there were a lot of stakeholders who weren't able to even access this zone. But I think that further emphasizes the lack of meaningful participatory opportunities for observers to, be a part of the climate regime and the policies that ultimately affect them.
Would you say, beyond this limited accessibility issue for observers, did you feel or notice that there are particular groups or subset of groups that should have really been sort of in that negotiating table that were also excluded? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I think historically excluded groups, minorities, indigenous communities, as well as youth, they were in the building. There were a lot of them that had the credentials to attend, but many of those that I spoke to felt like they weren't there to participate in a meaningful way. They were just there to check the UN's diversity box. But yeah, many of them just express, they can't get in the rooms. They don't feel like people are listening, even if they are there. So, I think that's a real issue in the UNFCCC system.
So with that in mind, this accessibility issue and how the meeting is set up based on your earlier description and the time that you were there, how would you assess the effectiveness of the formal parts or formal agenda of the COP26 meeting in actually instigating positive action for climate mitigation?
Yeah, so as far as the effectiveness of the COP26 agenda, based on my experience and what I observed, it all felt very performative. And, from the speeches by leaders at the high level events, their national statements, very performative rhetoric, lauding their nation's ambitions while, either committing to the bare minimum or attempting to derail negotiations behind closed doors. And that's not true of all of the leaders of, all nations, of course, but I think there's definitely a prevalent theme there. And you can also observe a lot of greenwashing in the pavilion spaces. So, by greenwashing, I mean these really deceptive marketing strategies almost that attempt to persuade the public to believe that one's actions or policies are environmentally friendly. And this really just paints an incomplete and dishonest representation about what nations are doing to fight climate change. I think that really, really mitigates the effectiveness of what's actually happening at the COP and, what results from these meetings.
You also mentioned the role of youth in terms of a participant to these meetings, especially beyond the role of observer. And really, when we think of youth, I think of the role they play in terms of climate activism. And they really have been a strong voice in placing pressure on leaders to be more aggressive in achieving climate mitigation. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that representation of climate activism by youth was at this particular meeting?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Like the youth represent a really strong voice for greater ambition from our world leaders. Like I said, they were present in the meeting, like in the official Blue Zone space as credentialed activists. But as I said, there were some issues of participation there where they felt like they weren't able to meaningfully participate. I'll also say that each day at the COP had an official theme. So, there was an energy day, there was a resilience day, a transportation day, and Friday of the first week was Youth and Public Empowerment Day. So there were a lot of events on that day pertaining to issues that directly affect, youth and historically excluded populations. But another, huge part of the conference, like you said, is this activism. So on Friday, that Youth and Public Empowerment Day was happening within the Blue Zone, but outside there was a massive climate youth march organized by Fridays for Future Scotland. I think last I saw the numbers were about 25,000 people marching on the streets of Glasgow. I attended this event. We walked through the streets of Glasgow and then stopped at this, historic square in downtown and listened to speeches from a lot of different activists from around the world. And, something that I noticed about these speeches that I think is really significant is that these activists were addressing a lot more systemic issues than anything I saw addressed in the actual COP. So, issues of climate colonialism, the exploitation of the global South by the global North in the context of, environment and resources that has largely contributed to where we're currently at with the climate crisis. Also, a lot of emphasis on, class struggle, that climate change is an issue of the rich exploiting the poor, all the while the poor are those that suffer the most from the climate crisis. So it was a really interesting tonal shift attending that youth march on Friday as compared to being inside the Blue Zone for the rest of the week that I was there.
So seeing how essentially vibrant and active and impactful it seemed, this youth march and the activities associated with it, how would you compare that experience that you were involved in with the youth march to other activities that are more associated with the formal meeting?
Like I said, they address more systemic issues. And I think through this, and then by virtue of them being youth and not political actors, the discussions that were being had at this youth march felt much more authentic and honest than anything that I observed all week within the venue. I think youth activists in the context of climate change kind of have their finger on the pulse more, that climate change, has economic issues and political issues within it, but at its core, it's an existential crisis that will affect the ability of humanity to live on this planet. And I think because youth activists aren't as distracted by economic issues or, the way things have always been done, they're able to address climate change in a much more honest and holistic way. And also, I think a part of that is that the youth movement more broadly is a lot more diverse and representative than the things that I observed inside the COP. So, youth activists from all over the world, from every continent, speaking about how the climate crisis and the effects of it have affected their own communities at home.
So, Abbey, based on your experience of attending this meeting and really looking forward beyond it, what would you say are major takeaways for you from being at this meeting?
Yeah, so when I think about takeaways, just things that I want to try to hold on to and that can hopefully, trends that I saw that will continue in the near future. I think ambition is one of them. Ambition has increased exponentially in the past, 5-10 years in terms of the international climate regime. And I think we can be hopeful that these upward trends will continue. But, being at the conference, I am a little skeptical that this will be done in the timeframe that's needed. So, a couple weeks before the COP, the UN Environment Program released its emissions gap report. And that found that the national climate pledges made leading up to the COP, if properly implemented, would still lead to global temperature rise of 2.7 degrees Celsius. Keeping in mind that 1.5 degrees is what is commonly accepted as the point of catastrophe. So, there's a lot of work to do, and I'm skeptical if it will be done in time. But keep in mind that we are seeing a lot more ambition than we've seen in the past. I also think there's something really significant about the growing public outcry and mobilization that we see through things like the Youth March and other protests that were happening in Glasgow and throughout the world during the COP. But, at the same time, like I said, all of these access issues, lack of opportunity to meaningfully engage with leaders and negotiators makes me skeptical of those who are in the negotiating rooms, those who actually, have the power to, draft these texts are actually, listening to the general public in a meaningful way. Also, I would note that there were a lot of, great agreements that came out of this COP, establishing greater transparency and reporting. We've seen unprecedented levels of financial support for developing countries and adaptation and new agreements as far as youth empowerment and gender equity. But it's still not enough to get us where we need to be. And I hope these upward trends will continue, but I suppose only time will tell on that front.
Yeah, it is sometimes hard to be hopeful with respect to the change that is needed to address the climate crisis we have on our hands. And as the meeting concluded, there was a flurry of activities, which though may seem small, could hopefully put into action larger steps moving forward at the next COP meeting and beyond. Thank you, Abbey. I really appreciate this discussion and sharing your experience from attending the COP26 meeting.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Though it may seem that the culmination of this COP meeting did little to put into effect major action to mitigate climate change, the Glasgow Climate Pact may hopefully push major action to occur at the next COP meeting so as to prevent further delay and further action that could translate into the worst projections of global warming possible.
That was Mohammed Mahmoud and Abbey Krulik. You can follow all of MEI's coverage of climate and water on our website at www.mei.edu. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in and to our production team for their work on today's episode. You can follow MEI on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and subscribe to our email newsletters for the latest analysis and information about upcoming events. I'm Alistair Taylor. We will see all of you next week.
This has been a presentation of the Middle East Institute. To support MEI's programs and podcasts, please donate at www.mei.edu. Thank you for your support.